Hi, I'm Gary Schwitzer, publisher of healthnewsreview.org, coming to you from St. Paul, Minnesota. I wish I were coming to you directly from Australia, but Melissa promises she'll get me there sometime. The title of my talk is that no matter the medium, there are healthcare messages that you simply must get right. So no matter whether it's for the web or in print or in broadcast, these messages, these issues apply. I often quote a Pulitzer-winning journalist, Don Bartlett, formerly of the Philadelphia Inquirer, who, in speaking to a large group of healthcare journalists, said, "The level of healthcare investigative reporting, so big projects, has never been better, even in small and medium-sized papers. But these once or twice or three times a year sort of peaks or spikes of excellence don't make up for the daily drumbeat of healthcare reporting that he called a disgrace. There are no breakthroughs. That should be the next paragraph in the story when anyone makes such a claim." Well, when you look at healthcare news every day, as I do in my project, which you'll hear more about in a minute, you see things you otherwise might miss. So in one recent week, we saw this. Two stories that used drug company vice presidents as their main sources, one of them predicting a breakthrough without giving any evidence for the idea. One story was based solely on a news release on mouse research about a new approach to fight bone loss. Another story proclaimed that a treatment may work after it was tested on just 9 pieces of tissue outside the body, a true out-of-body experience. Another story anointed a cancer gene therapy as a breakthrough after it had been tested on just 3 tumor samples. You see where the bar is becoming lower every day. Were these in a college student newspaper? No. They were in the New York Times, the LA Times, the International Writers Wire Service, and the Health Day Wire Service. That's not journalism, that's cheerleading. And that's what has turned me into an angry old man like Howard Beale in the movie Network, who was mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. On this slide, you see on the left-hand side some things that we see too much of in news stories. So too much about cures and breakthroughs and alleged miracles. Too many light, fluffy, feel-good consumer news you can use stories that show unquestioning awe over claims that are being made, especially if the claims come from anybody at our local medical center or in our local industry, and especially, it seems, on the business page or the business section of our papers. But we get too few stories on the right that question claims, investigate evidence, apply healthy skepticism, that report on costs, access to care, or alternative options, and that help consumers navigate these confusing healthcare waters, and that look at conflicts of interest in their sources. Well, so what if they don't? What's the harm? Well, the harm is that such stories can whip the worried well into a frenzy. They can raise unrealistic expectations of our healthcare system and drive patients in to see their doctors, promoting undue demand of costly, unproven ideas that in the end may cause more harm than good. One particular area that has bothered me and I've written about is when journalists cross a line and become cheerleaders or advocates or crusaders on behalf of various screening tests outside the boundaries of evidence. It was Mark Twain, maybe it was someone else, who said one of my favorite quotes, "It ain't what people don't know that worries me. It's what they know that just ain't so." And so on TV, when we have Larry King, who thank goodness is retiring from CNN, and Michael Milken, and former tennis player John McEnroe, and a urologist promoting prostate cancer screening without talking about the uncertainties and the harms, these are crusaders who just know that screening always makes sense, and they easily whip the worried well into a frenzy. The problem is, what they know often just ain't so. This is an equally true statement, which we need to help educate consumers in this. All screening tests cause harm. Some along the way may do good. To promote screening outside the boundaries of evidence is a form of disease mongering. It's making everybody think they have to look for the weapons of mass destruction inside all of us. Disease mongering is also when you medicalize a normal state of health or a normal variation of normal health and make it something that must be treated. It's exaggerating the seriousness or prevalence of a condition, or as the Australian journalist Ray Moynihan calls it, it's selling sickness. And that's what turns many of us into the Howard Beals of today. So this is why I have launched this site, now 4 years old, called healthnewsreview.org, that reviews the quality of news stories. It's actually modeled after a pioneering Australian site called Media Doctor Australia. We apply 10 criteria to the review of stories that include claims about how well something works. I won't go through these 10 criteria in any detail because you can either go on our website or Media Doctor Australia and learn more about them. But here is the report card after 4 years and more than 1,000 stories. About 70% of the stories failed to adequately say how much this great idea they're reporting on, how much it costs. About 70% of stories fail to often explain how small the potential benefit is and how large the potential harm of the idea may be. So we wrap that up this way, that most stories are giving a kid in the candy store view of healthcare, where you're making everything look terrific, risk-free, and without a price tag, and nothing could be further from the truth. And we're simply not educating and fostering a very informed healthcare consumer population with this kind of journalism. Well, are we having any impact? That's difficult to prove. I can give you some anecdotes of some signs of progress. So a very good reporter at the New York Times, as an example, reported on the popular cholesterol-lowering statin drugs and used the important number needed to treat statistic. How many people do you need to treat in order for one to benefit? And in this case, it's 500. 500 have to take it for a year in order to benefit. And at $3.50 a pill, that means that to prevent one heart attack would cost $638,000. It's a whole paradigm shift, a different way of looking at how we should be reporting on stories. There are many stories that seem to confuse association with causation in what we call observational studies. So in such a study, you can't, as this story implies, show that coffee lowers risk. You can only show a statistical association. Well, there are stories that are now starting to tell it that way. Here on this Health Day Wire service I've highlighted in yellow, they actually said we shouldn't draw any conclusions about a causal relationship. This was only an observational study. And at the bottom they say it could be due to chance. Maybe we are having an impact. Here's a story about a new drug for premature ejaculation. It was based on a talk at a scientific meeting, and at the end of the story they said this was presented at a meeting. It should be considered preliminary. It hasn't undergone peer review. And they explain why that's significant. Maybe we're having an impact on some of these stories. I wish we'd see more stories that looked at unproven, high-tech, costly treatments like proton beam cancer radiation therapy. Here was a Columbus, Ohio story that reported on a man who had to go all the way to Florida to be treated this way, but the good news at the end of the story was that there were now 2 such facilities being developed in the Ohio area. But the story didn't explain how much it costs to build these facilities, how much it costs a patient to have these treatments, that we don't have all the evidence, and we don't know how many of these we need in the world, in the U.S., in a region, much less a state, or in this one city. It didn't take much for the New York Times to do a much better job on this same topic, saying that some experts see this as both the best and the worst of our market-based healthcare system. And they quoted an expert saying, we just don't have the data to show that this approach is any better than what we're already doing. Here's a little bit about how we operate and how the more we post, the more our traffic goes up. We're now reviewing about 30 stories a month. We also have a blog on our site, and we post about 50 different blog entries a month. We're averaging more than 3,600 unique visits a day. For some big websites, that might be peanuts, but for a little mom and pop shop like ours, I'm really very happy with that. And as I'm recording this in mid-August, we've now had 15 straight days with more than 4,000 unique visits a day. More anecdotes about what impact we may be having. The chief executive officer of one news organization said his company was actually losing business because a competitor was getting higher scores from us than his company was. A national radio network person said, thanks, I have all of my young people read your site and they learn from it and are doing better. And many reporters at a national health journalism conference told me that we're having a lot of impact on their work and on the work of others. From a new media perspective, we've now built and offer a widget that any site can put on their own website that captures some of our latest reviews and our blog posts. And on the right, you can see several important websites are already using that widget on their own site. So in conclusion, I just want to get across that in any medium, even in 300 words a day, journalists can start to get across some very important themes, that in healthcare, more is not always better. Newer is not always better, and screening tests don't always make sense for everybody. If you get that across, you could do so much good, or there are so many ways to waste the time and space or to actually do harm. Here's my email address. I hope that you follow up with me. I hope to see you on your turf someday, or if you're in the U.S., that I see you on mine. Thanks for your interest.